Hello, and welcome to Luz at Midnight, Chicanx Cli-Fi for a polar vortex. My name is Marisol Cortez, and I'm a writer, editor, and community scholar rooted in Yaganawenna, which is the name originally given to this place by the Ixtocana. The Tapilam Coahuiltecan Nation similarly knows it as Yanawana, which is how the Spanish military and religious missionary expeditions that colonized this region recorded that original word. And today, of course, we know it by its colonial name of San Antonio, Texas, which is my home and which is the place that I'm speaking to you from tonight. I am super excited to be reading for the Asley community from my Cli-Fi novel called Luz at Midnight, which was recently published by FlowerSong Press, a small press out of the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. Luz is a book about a lot of things. It's about the political ecology of San Antonio. It's about the inner workings of activist communities, both good and bad. It has a lot to do with what we call mental illness. It has a little to do with academia. But above all, it tells the story of an ill-timed love that unfolds between an emotionally adolescent political scientist and a manic-depressive environmental journalist, all presided over by a cosmic street dog named Luz, who was born in a lightning storm. And the main characters cross paths in exposing the corruption that surrounds a rare earth mineral boom that is sweeping South Texas, promising everybody a rapid and very profitable transition to an all-renewable energy future. It's a story based on my time working as an organizer around climate justice and development politics in San Antonio. And it tells a climate change story that I think is unique to Chicanx, South Texas, placing regional dynamics of environmental racism within much longer colonial histories, while at the same time telling what I think is probably also a more universal story of unrequited love and longing. Luz came out late last year in December 2020, and earlier this year, a couple of its subplots seemed to leap from page to real life in these kind of weird ways. First, an Australian rare earth mining company announced it would be building a processing facility in a small town outside of San Antonio. But that news was overshadowed just a couple weeks later by the polar vortex that hit Texas in February, tripping rolling blackouts and water outages across the state and claiming hundreds of lives, disproportionately people of color, elders, and people with disabilities. This was the climate event that led many of the book's reviewers to describe Luz as somehow prescient. Because in the book, not only do we see a similar polar vortex event, we also see the story itself set in motion by summer power outages that take place amid extreme heat, leading to the deaths of brown and black elders. I was as freaked out as my reviewers were by these apparent parallels between fiction and real life. But I also knew that I'd crafted those subplots based on research into the most plausible climate disruption scenarios in South Texas, given what we've already seen happening here for the past 10 to 20 years. But as my family and I crammed together for a week into one room of our house to stay warm, it was still weird to see speculation become lived reality. What I want to do today is read a bit from the book, starting with those parts of the story that reference the politics of utility justice, but also pulling from the love story. Before I do, though, I want to just comment briefly on what I think Chicanx Cli-Fi can offer current post-vortex discussions of recovery and resilience. I recently read a long dissection of The Ministry for the Future, Kim Stanley Robinson's utopian Cli-Fi novel. Acknowledging that Robinson is the, quote, king of Cli-Fi, critic Samuel Miller MacDonald issued a pointed takedown of the book's, quote, tale of the plucky bureaucrat who uses science, reason, and technical expertise to stumble onto the perfect combination of policy incentives and new technology to save the day, end quote. In fairness, I haven't read Robinson's book, And if that is the vision it offers, I'm all for that particular takedown. But I also found myself a little irritated by such a long piece on such a big-name writer, published by a big New York City publishing house. I wanted to respond by saying, instead of complaining so much about Robinson, or maybe in addition to complaining so much about Robinson, why not explore BIPOC Cli-Fi from lesser-known places, like Cherie L. Smith's Orleans, set in coastal Louisiana, or Rebecca Roanhorse's Sixth World series, which sets Cli-Fi fantasy within Indian country. I would venture to say that in those works, you won't find many illusions about technical experts. Luce, in fact, is centrally grounded in an in-the-trenches rage and exhaustion over how swiftly we've already seen technical experts turn a grassroots push for decarbonization into more of the same. More racial capitalism, more colonial relations to Earth and to each other. In Luce, there's a keen understanding that post-carbon doesn't necessarily mean post-extraction, post-profit, or post-local growth machine. In fact, if Luce is about anything, it's about the total failure of technical expertise to protect our communities, be that academic, journalistic, scientific, governmental, even the expertise of nonprofit paid organizing. It's literally a book about how not to handle climate change. What remains in the story, amid a system that bends toward repetition and inertia, is the joys of solidarity, which is to say, the pleasures of togetherness, forged in organizing networks of care for our neighbors, both human and planetary. This is why I see the multiple unrequited love stories in the book, the stories about the honesty of desire, about its invincible agency, as so important. It's desire and pleasure in each other's company that will get us through disaster and whatever technical solutions to disaster that those in power propose. For Chicanx Cli-Fi in particular, because of the way original relationships to land and thus our own identities have been distorted by colonial processes, what will also get us through is remembering those landscapes inhabited by our human ancestors and more than human relatives. This remembering of the land and our original relations to it, whether through our own kinship or via solidarity with contemporary indigenous struggles, also points the way forward. So, let me read to you. But rather than read in one static shot, what I've done today is put together a couple of video readings. The first one takes you via green screen to one of our city council meetings, and the second is shot at the San Antonio River at dusk, so you can see kind of the light changing as the piece progresses. I thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy. The only bright spots that winter are the city council sessions, where Lali sits in the plush auditorium seating of the council chambers with Chela and Naima, keeping an ear cocked for news of the city's legal entanglements with Sizemar. Sometimes checking email, sometimes listening quietly, sometimes snarking in whispers or taking notes. Something is revealing itself, something is coming into view. Lali has not abandoned the student's habit of traveling everywhere with backpack slung over one shoulder, and in her bag is a spiral notebook where she collects notes and thoughts, and sometimes even poems, research notas, she calls them. Feeling form emerge from non-form, the shape of an argument rising in relief against the chaos of observation. Something that would explain the how and the why of it, shining a light on what they need to do. These moments of clarity appear between long bouts of boredom, although sometimes there are moments of levity too. Once, Chela burst into the meeting late and unknowingly seated herself one row up from Butch Keller of Keller and Keller, the most powerful developer lobbyist in town, and thus the legal representative of Sizemar Explorations, LLC. That man gets whatever he wants, Sister Soli had warned Chela long ago. I should know. I ran against his father for mayor. You see him involved, you know something's up. And now, there he was, behind unsuspecting Chela. Lali had to rip a ribbon of paper from her spiral and dash a quick note, twisting over the back of her seat, to pass it back to Chela. Psst! Did you know Keller from Keller, and Keller, i.e. KKK, is sitting right behind you? Chela had glanced behind her surreptitiously, pretending to look out the window, then dipped her head to write back. I'll be sure to fart extra hard then. Yeah, it felt good to go to the meetings as gutter punk as possible. Braless and menstruating, dirty, stinky chucks with no socks and flapping soles, legs hairy and armpits funky as hell. Then there was the time the representative of a rare earth trade group, the United Rare Earth Association, or UREA, lobbied the council in support of domestic rare earth production. Lali and Chela and Naima had passed Lali's notebook between them, furiously scribbling acronyms for a citizens' lobby that might oppose UREA. The People's Organization of Ore Opposition, or POO. Citizens Against Corrupt Assholes, or CACA. Demonstrating intense, agitated resistance without existing alternatives, or diarrhea. And then there was the time they played hangman, on a day when they'd been sitting in the council chambers since 9 in the morning, waiting for their agenda item to come up. Apparently, it'd been pushed back since Mayor Mike was running late, in that morning on a red-eye from a Spurs game in Mexico City the night before. Items had gotten pushed back, items had gotten jumbled around. So they waited, and as they waited, they played hangman, heads huddled together. Fuck this shit, was Naima's secret phrase, which Chela easily solved before Stickman hung. Let's get high, was Chela's offering. Lollies stumped them. Poopity, whoopity, flushity, wushity, plop, plop, plop? Chela had whispered slowly as the puzzle finally revealed itself. What's with you and shit? She said, shaking her head. They'd played on, snickering and snorting like middle school malcriadas. And when the mayor arrived with face flushed, he flashed them ojo from his seat at the dais, making them shake even harder with silent laughter, eyes streaming. Today, they have come to the meeting to hear the city attorney update the council on the status of investigations into what Sizemar knew about the cost discrepancy and when they knew it. And so, they are caught off guard by the 20 or 30 people who file up the chamber aisle to excoriate the city for voting the previous week to sharply increase their electric rates. A rate hike? Last week? Naima gasps. Did y'all hear anything about a 15% rate hike they passed last week? Nah, says Chela. Says Lali. Naima leans forward to fold her arms on the seat in front of her, chin resting on top, as the elder members of Vamos, or Viejos, against more of the same, approach the podium one by one. Damn, she says. That's some serious shit in this weather. Shh, oye, mama. I'm trying to hear what he's saying. The old man at the podium, flanked by a squadron of viejitas, looks worn and disheveled in a rumpled suit that swims on his slight frame, but his voice is firm and practiced. City power and light, he is saying. The utility that is supposed to belong to the city, to the people, had the nerve to approach you behind everyone's back for a rate increase? You trust their CEO on this after all the sneaking around on the Sizemar project last fall? What's more, you borrowed a trick from their playbook and actually gave it to them behind everyone's back. And bills are already rising. Just think back to last winter, last summer. We can't even keep our houses livable when it's cold or hot out. Meanwhile, big companies like Sizemar and the developers of those smokestack apartments are getting tax breaks and fee waivers left and right from the city while our homes fall apart from not having the money to fix them. At the very least, you should have waited until you were out of your legal mess. At the bare minimum, you should have had CPL release a line item budget showing what they want all that money for. But we are not asking for the bare minimum. We're telling you no. No means no, no rate hike. And if we have to, we'll recall it. Behind him, the viejitas cheer. Chela stands and emits a wolf whistle. Chela, mumbles Naima, embarrassed but proud. You want to get us kicked out of here? Chela ignores her. We gotta connect with those folks. Who, Manuel Martinez? That old brown beret? Naima clucks her tongue. He's okay, I guess, if you like being elbowed out of the way so he can jump in front of the mic. Everybody knows it's the women in Vamos who do all the work. I know, says Chela impatiently. Still, that shit's for real. We gotta support. So go and ask him to marry you already, says Naima. Watch me, Chela retorts, bounding off to the corner of the chambers where Vamos has gathered to debrief. With the council now broken for lunch, the crowd has dispersed into small standing clusters of conversation. As they squirm in their seats, waiting for Chela to return, Lali gazes out over the council chambers. There's dumb old Henry Farr. Henry Fart, everybody called him, probably even the council, who speaks to every single agenda item at every single council meeting. There are the sharks in suits with their dreams of converting the power plants of yore into the oxygen bars and doggy daycares of tomorrow, idling around for their pet zoning cases. There's Butch Keller, giving a Heil Hitler greeting to the city manager from across the room. And there's a slate of reporters from the city paper standing shoulder to shoulder at the back, looking bored. Where's Chela now? She's moved away from Manuel Martinez and also stands at the back, talking with that Volt reporter. Feeling him out, for what he knows undoubtedly. But a pang of something uneasy, wanted but unwanted, runs through Lali. She wants him to look over, to notice her and wave goodbye. Jesus, why? As they file out of the chamber, Chela jabbering excitedly about her discoveries, Lali thinks about turning to wave. But she doesn't, willing that her retreat be an entreat, an invitation. When Lali drives away, she's supposed to head for her parents' house, but instead she drives back to her street where her empty apartment now waits for its next tenant. Passing the apartment, she parks one last time past the tracks, near their neck of the river. She walks to the bike path, where only weeks before she had stood with her hand cradled against the side of Joel's face. Tears stream from her eyes, but she hardly notices. She walks, visions of her father's river stories from his childhood rising before her, fever bright. He used to fish in this river with his brothers. Did he swim? No, it had been too wild. They were scared of snakes and sharp branches. But there was a raft one of the old men who fished there had tied to a tree, and sometimes the kids would take it downstream and bring it back when they were done. They must have. He can't remember. The question had seemed to confuse him. Yaganawena notices her approach, and she watches with her eyes closed, breathing deeply. She remembers the pain of the original people, their emissaries burned and ground into dust by the city people sent to greet them, who took their gifts before throwing the ash of charred bone and hair into her waters. Then she ran wide and swift. They could use her in that way for flushing the filth they emanated. She had felt pain then, pain for her people, but it was one of the only times. Otherwise, she was just too big, too long, too wide for their suffering and their struggles to make much of a dent, even now, in her constricted state. Lali's grief propagates like infrared, but it is only that. It disperses. It comes and it goes. Its waves leave no wake. But she is there, Yaganawena. Lali sits on the banks, knees folded into her arms, a million questions tripping over each other and tumbling down the basement stairs of her brain, down into darkness, like, will we know each other in 10 years? And do we know each other now? And why desire if it can't hit its mark or create something lasting? And what is it to last? What is it that lasts? And what did the universe want? What was its desire? That was the question at the very bottom. And the answer came back so strong and sharp, it felt like waking suddenly in the night. It wants only for us to decide what it wants. It means only what we decide it means. That was the terrible burden and freedom both. The freedom to say, to propose in the dual meaning of that word, to advance an argument or proffer an idea within an ongoing exchange, to stake a claim without resolution save a desire to continue conversation. But to propose was also to kneel, to apply, head bent, in surrender to the other's absolute freedom, to go or to stay, to say yes or no, to speak or not speak. We must have met in order to talk, she thinks, to consider the question together. But it was a terrible question, like the pleas on the radio. Sweetly sung, but terrible all the same. Oye, mi amor, no me digas que no. Listen, my love, don't tell me no. Please, please say yes. The pop song knew her question was a terrible one. Not bad, but grave, serious. It was a question that made and broke lives, a question that could not be ignored. So heavy, she could not ask it yet, but also so dire, she could not avoid asking it eventually. And someday, she thinks, I will have to ask it and risk the possibility that you will say no, or worse, that you won't respond. She imagined him before her like a stick figure in a cartoon, forlorn, a thought bubble rising above his head, filled with ellipses trailing off, ... The question had bubbled up and she bit it off in time because she knew he had no response. Not that he didn't want to, but he didn't know what to say. He was standing perfectly straight and still, waiting to receive some word or sign that would tell him what was right, and he couldn't move until he heard it. She had found him like that, all alone, standing still, and she had left him like that, still listening intently for something else. But the signal he wanted wouldn't come. She could see that. He would have to decide for himself. But he couldn't, but it didn't matter. She could see it wasn't his fault. He was like a dog that chose your lap for its head when you were lonely, on a day when you needed it most. Or, more truthfully, like a bird that lit on your arm for a moment, a gift you couldn't keep. A dog at least was internally consistent, predictable, but you couldn't be angry at a bird for flying. I am comforted thinking it will be right to ask only when I feel the answer must be yes, she thinks. I am comforted thinking that one day it will be yes. Lali doesn't know why, but she lowers herself from the banks into the water. Its embrace is waist deep, warm, and she moonwalks along the bottom with eyes closed, letting the slow current take her. Underneath the bike bridge, where she sat with Joel, past the empty lot where half-finished, dome-shaped art studios sit like huts, left to rust after the developers discovered how contaminated the soil was by whatever had been there before. Earlier dreams of a Renaissance abandoned. Past the opera house of release gates built to divert the river in times of flooding so the overflow ran beneath ground and not through the downtown commercial district. Past the closed-down, burnt-out refinery, waiting on a transition increasingly uncertain. She slips through the water like a tear into a torrent, rolling on her back to float, following the tunnel of her own despair to its center, until finally she surfaces on the other side. Wriggling out of the river's grasp, she spread eagles herself on the banks, smelling the water on her skin like musty basement, the faint and unwashable trace of repurposed wastewater, of origins and destinations. She hoists herself onto her elbows and, looking around, sees the centuries peel back to reveal a land untransformed by sadness. The river's bed widens and its banks grow thick with cypress and mesquite and pecan, chattering with unseen nightlife. She senses the murky green-black water clearing and river cane rising to surround her, swaying like seaweed. She hears the quiet snuffle of deer and bison grazing amid stands of little bluestem and zarzamora bramble, and beyond them lie the silent shapes of bear and puma and wolf. She sees immense kingdoms of nopales, their tender paddles heavy with ruby fruit, guarded by noble thorns. I can't survive this longing. I don't want to survive it. Love courses through her, but it is too strong to be nurturing, ripping her apart with the force of a storm, ripping her out of the earth by the roots, hurtling her into the dark matter of space where they propel past one another, even as they grasped. Yaganawena watches with eyes closed, hearing without ears. In the sway of her cane, the sweet pom-pom blossom of huizache, the rustle of snake, and rooting of armadillo, she nods, she knows. When they are together, but in no way Lali recognizes, no earthly way capable of words or plans. She longs to be with him in some way she understands, but it is not to be. He is not to be with in that way. He is a contemplative, a holy man, a teacher. Her eye is on him, but his is on the sky. Her arms crane toward him, but his point upward, waiting for the ecstasy of ascent, fingers escaping into tree branches like Daphne into laurel, while she is an earthbound Apollo, left to books and theory, left to try to understand what will not be understood. The only lesson can be to learn how to bear her own longing, the space of flight and abandonment without devastation. But I don't want to. Her heart cries out to the darkness of earth. I don't want to bear it, but I don't have a choice. There's nothing I can do. Yaganawena does not speak, does not need to, has never bothered to learn. But the rising image of her presence, teeming with the movement of her indifferent inhabitants, is a kind of mute sympathy. She is there. I know. I'm sorry. I love you.